Your list is trash. It reminds me of the old Just for Men commercial for beard and mustache, where Keith Hernandez and Walt Frazier are telling Emmitt Smith, your beard is weird, your stash is trash. Your list is trash, Peter.
Hey, I don't know why I do this other than to generate more social media contact and whatever than I do the rest of the year combined. It's unbelievable how much people seem to care about this list every year. But the way I look at this is I'm going to tell you an easy thing to do, and that is take last year's standings and say, well, here we go. The not easy thing to do is to say, I think Tampa Bay is going to be number 31 in the league, and I think Detroit is going to be number 6 in the league. And I do remember that, and again, look, I'm wrong a lot on these things, but I do remember when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were coming off a 7-9 season with an old quarterback who nobody trusted anymore after the end of his last year in New England, picking them, high in the top 10, and then later in the summer, picking them to get to the Super Bowl. And that got a lot of really positive reaction. And the same thing, I picked the 49ers coming off an awful year to be good. But anyway, my point is very simple, that in this job, Mike, you know what you're paid to do? You're paid to have a little bit of a crystal ball. You just are. If people say, hey, who do you like this year? Well, it's easy to say, well, I like Philadelphia and Kansas City. No crap, Sherlock. So pick 2 or 3 teams on both sides of the spectrum. Pick 2 or 3 teams who you like better than other people do, and pick a team or 2 or 3 who you think might crash and burn. And so that is what I attempt to do every year with this list.
And the challenge with that is, if you're wrong about the teams that were good last year, people just kind of shrug. If you throw a dart on a team that was bad last year that you think is going to ascend and you're wrong, they think you've lost your damn mind. And the deeper problem is this, especially with power rankings this time of year. The offseason is about building hope, plausible or otherwise. The last thing that fans want to see is their team in the bottom half of the hierarchy, especially in the final 6 or 7 spots, at a time when the NFL offseason is all about generating hope. This can be the year. You can do it. Look how quickly this team turned it around. Look how quickly that team turned it around. And people get more upset, far more upset in the offseason when they can delude themselves with 0-0. 0-0 can do a lot of work for a fan. And they can think that the Super Bowl is within reach. And you drop them down to 30, 31, 32, they're going to be pissed. So they're going to be pissed no matter what this time of year. Let's look at some of this feedback that you got. This one was from FMIA reader Bill regarding the decision that the Eagles should be the number 1 team at this point. Philly didn't beat anybody last season. Very soft schedule. Got lucky against San Francisco and lost the Super Bowl. I disagree with that. I think you're right to put the Eagles at number 1. I would do the same thing. They've reloaded in several areas. They are just scratching the surface of what they can be. The question is, psychologically, how do they recover from what happened last year? Can they go back to 0-0 and dig out again after losing the Super Bowl when they were up 10 points in the second half? But they have the talent, Peter, to pick up right where they left off last year.
I think one of the reasons why I put the Eagles first and Kansas City second is very simple, that I think Kansas City's path to winning the AFC and winning another Super Bowl is going to be much more difficult than Philadelphia's path. Not that Philadelphia has an easy schedule. It's tougher than it was a year ago. But Kansas City's schedule is an absolute killer. And so to me, I think you factor that in. And I think you could say, the Bengals got a really tough schedule. Buffalo has a tough schedule and all that. And so I don't know what's going to happen in the AFC. Is Lamar Jackson going to be the rising tide that lifts all boats? Can Lamar Jackson stay healthy? If Lamar Jackson plays 17 games, I think Baltimore's going to win 11. And, I don't know whether that means they'll win their division and beat Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, or whether it just means they'll make the playoffs. But they're going to be a lot better than they were in December and January last year. I think the one other thing about that question that bothers me a bit, as well as a lot of questions about the Eagles, I just ask, did you watch the Super Bowl? And were you convinced that day at the 55-minute mark of the game with 5 minutes to go? I'm sitting there right next to you in the press box, Mike, and I just was thinking to myself, Philadelphia is a better team. They didn't win the game, so they weren't the better team. But with 5 minutes to go and down the stretch of that game, there were many times I kept thinking about how good Philadelphia is. And, they didn't win the game. But I don't know how you could look at that game and not, A, fall in love with the quarterback, and B, fall in love with the depth of the team. And the thing that I believe, although they won't say it because it's sour grapes, and it's spilled milk, but here's what I wonder, Mike. When Hassan Reddick goes to bed and lays his head on the pillow on May 19th, do you think any bit of him comes back to thinking, man, if that was a regular football field, if that was a fast track that day, what I would have been able to do to Patrick Mahomes? But it didn't happen, so you're right. It's all spilled milk. It's all water under the bridge and every other cliche you can think about.
Eagles were the better team. Chiefs had Mahomes. The field was a factor, even though the Eagles won't say it publicly. And the whole Jonathan Gannon thing that popped up within the past 3 weeks, how distracted was he by his day after the Super Bowl interview with the Cardinals, when they still didn't figure out how to deal with motion and shifts? It was 2 key plays in the second half where the Eagles defense was confounded, as they were all year long, by motions and shifts. They weren't ready for it, and that's what burned them. So if they can iron out some of those wrinkles, they can get right back to the top of the mountain. You mentioned the Lions earlier. They're a team that many believe will be a hot team this year. They get the assignment week 1, NBC, Thursday night, September 8th at Kansas City. You have them at 6. Football Morning in America reader John Lane. I've got a lifelong friend named John Lane who listens to the show. So hello, John, and thank you for your question. If you're the same John Lane, not exactly an uncommon name, why are people so big on the Lions? Weren't we all making fun of their draft a couple of weeks ago? Why are you so big on the Lions?
I mean, the Lions, when I think about the Lions, I think of this word that is definitely going to be a word that you will use on my vocabulary thingamajig. I think of the word gestalt. Okay? So you say gestalt, what's that? And I say, well, the sum is better than the parts. And in my opinion, I don't look at Aiden Hutchinson and say, well, here's the next Bruce Smith. I don't look at Jared Goff and say, oh my God, there's Aaron Rodgers. I don't look at, at Amon-Ra St. Brown and say, that guy's Justin Jefferson, although he's really good. So I look at this team that is a team that has a really good, where Brad Holmes, the general manager, has done a great job, in my opinion. And I'm not crazy about them letting Jamal Williams go. He's a great leader, scored 17 touchdowns. I think one day there might be a 30 for 30 on that or something, whatever the deep dive into. Why in the world did they let Jamal Williams walk? But my belief is that Dan Campbell believes that he can create a running game. Just like a year ago, nobody would have said, oh my God, Jamal Williams, man, he's going to be the keystone to your offense. Nobody would have said that. And he ended up being that. But I think they have enough pieces to the puzzle. As I say, Brad Holmes, what he has done is he's built real quality depth on this roster. I just like the Lions, especially in a diminished, as I said a couple of minutes ago, a diminished division like the NFC North.
I can do your 30 for 30 on Jamal Williams in about 30 seconds. I think it's as simple as that very kooky, quirky personality we see from time to time that we find very engaging because we see it in short bursts. I think he's that way all the time, and they just had enough of it. They just had enough of this guy who is kooky and quirky all the time. And it's a fungible position. They had the plan to get a running back. They got Jahmyr Gibbs. They bring in David Montgomery. They let Jamal Williams walk away, and they didn't offer him very much money to stick around. You have the Vikings, who were 13-4 last year, with a horrendous defense that can't get any worse this year. The offense only going to get better. They're at number 14. FMIA reader Brutus says the Vikings won the division, have most of their team back on offense, not defense, but it doesn't matter. The defense was horrible. Lions haven't won the division this century. Explain. We've talked about why you have the Lions so high. Why do the Vikings fall to middle of the pack after being 13-4?
I just sort of feel like the Vikings window is closing, Mike. Might be wrong. I just feel when I looked at the Vikings toward the end of last year, I don't trust them in big moments. I think they're a nice team that can win any game they play. But the fact is they've won one playoff game in the Kirk Cousins era. And I just don't see the kind of radical improvement that you need to get better and to compete on the same level as the Philadelphia Eagles. That's how I view it. And look, then trading Zadarius Smith, and I totally understand that at some point, if a guy is not going to be with the program, and this is a much different story than Aaron Rodgers, but Zadarius Smith wanted a new contract, wanted money, all that. And I think if you're the Vikings, you say we have to allocate our resources wisely. And the one other thing about the Vikings, I think Kevin O'Connell and this team, this coaching staff, I think this is a big year for not only the coaching staff as a whole, but Kirk Cousins and his future. Because, Mike, you have to ask yourself this question. At the end of this year, are you, Mr. Viking, going to want to pay Kirk Cousins $45 million a year? And that might be being conservative.
Well, and the reason for hope is, as I said earlier, the defense can't get any worse. And they have Brian Flores in there, and I think he alone, his presence, will make the defense better. Offensively, it's the first time since Cousins was in Washington that he's had the same person in his ear pre-snap for consecutive years. Second year in the offense, Kevin O'Connell explained to me last week the things they're doing to help Kirk Cousins become more comfortable, and he'll only be better. Justin Jefferson will only be better. They've added Jordan Addison. They love KJ Osborne. They have TJ Hawkinson. They believe that entire offensive system is going to improve. But the problem with being 13-4 right out of the gates, you create a higher level of expectation, and it's more likely to go down. I agree with you. It's a key year for the Vikings, particularly Kirk Cousins. It feels like this is it for him unless he can access something that will allow them to get past the divisional round. To me, their ceiling continues to be get blown out in the divisional round. They didn't quite get to the ceiling last year, but one of the reasons why I think plenty of Vikings fans weren't upset about the loss to the Giants in the wild card round is they knew what was coming. They saw it come for the Giants the following Saturday night in Philadelphia. It was either the Eagles or the 49ers, and it wasn't going to end well. And I feel like that's the same thing this year. And so I think it justifies middle of the pack consideration going into the season. Now, you have the Buccaneers. You mentioned this earlier, too, at number 31. Chris Scheifen, and I apologize if I mispronounced the name. Chris, FMIA reader, says the Bucs still have most of their Super Bowl team. Baker Mayfield's passer rating the year before he got hurt was 5 points higher than Tom Brady's last year. How is a team with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Tristan Wirfs, Ryan Jensen, Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, Devin White, Levante David, Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, and on we go. How is that team at the same level with Houston and Arizona, who have about 3 players each anyone can name?
I sort of look at the Buccaneers, and I understand that everybody says, my God, they got so many guys left from that Super Bowl team. And I would just say this, Mike. In the last 5 weeks of last season, I'm just going to read this off for a second. They allowed 35, 34, 16, 24, and 30 points. And so for everybody saying, oh my God, look at this great defense. They still have all these weapons left on the defense. You're right. They have great names on that defense. That defense better play better because the offense is going to struggle, I think, because I still don't know what has been done for a team that might have had the worst running game in the NFL last year. It's pretty hard when you're Todd Bowles and you want to run the ball, to run for 1,304 yards in 17 games. That is utterly from hunger. And so I think this team has a lot of holes, and it would be one thing if the guys on that front seven were coming off all great years, okay? But I don't think they are. So we'll see what happens. They certainly do have the resumes to throw out there on the field on opening day to be better than they were at the end of last year. So they might be. But again, and by the way, the reader who basically said, well, Baker Mayfield is better than a year, whatever he said before he got hurt, is better his passer rating than Tom Brady. I will also say that, how did you win the Arizona game, at the end of the season? How did you stay in the pennant race late in the year by winning at Arizona? How did you win some of those games down the stretch? And even though Brady wasn't the magnificent Brady that he always was, I get it. And I get that it's time to move on. No argument there. But let's just remember, there's a lot of teams that have had Baker Mayfield on their team in the last 4 years. And for him to be free, absolutely, totally free, and to not have people beating a path to his door, just basically tells you a lot that you need to know. Here's a question for you. Why didn't the Rams try hard to keep him, knowing that their quarterback has been hurt a bit, in Matthew Stafford? They didn't try hard to keep him. And so all I'm saying is I like the fact that the alternative is Baker Mayfield. But I think this alternative has 1 year written all over it.
Glass half full assessment of the Buccaneers from my perspective. Number one, Mayfield has had a couple of good performances, 2018 and 2020. 21 was marred by the shoulder injury that he suffered in week 2. It was his own fault trying to make a tackle after a turnover. Last year, it was Carolina. It was the Rams. He made the move to the Panthers late in the offseason. He wasn't able to be as good as he could be. That's kind of a chalk it up to bad circumstance. This year, maybe with a clean slate, Dave Canales, who turned around Geno Smith last year for the Seahawks, maybe he can make a difference for Mayfield. I also look, Peter, at the fact that, and you mentioned earlier, the possibility of a 30 for 30 for why Jamal Williams is no longer with the Lions. How about a full season of 30 for 30s on what the hell went on last year in Tampa Bay with Tom Brady disappearing during training camp and the overall burden psychologically that Brady's status put on the team? I think it's a breath of fresh air for them to have moved on. It goes all the way back to him retiring, unretiring, and then Bruce Arians is gone. There was just a weird cloud over the team all last year. That's not there this year. I don't know that it makes them better, but it's not there this year. And I look at that and I just wonder, no expectations, everybody writing them off. They still have a cluster of players from the Super Bowl team there. Could they be better than we expect in a wide open NFC South?
No question they could be. And this is about me gambling on the Atlanta Falcons having the most interesting and potentially explosive offense in the NFL if they even get a C-plus performance out of Desmond Ridder.
Okay, before we take a break, one last comment from FMIA reader Robert Gillespie Sr. This list made me think I'm high. So So I don't know how old Robert Gillespie Sr. is. I don't know whether he smokes with Junior or needs to hide it from Junior, but he knows how it feels to be high, apparently. Let's go ahead and take a break. A game of which doesn't belong and why when this Friday edition of PFT Live continues right after this. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.